Good morning, everyone, and welcome to NHBSR's Measure What Matters webinar, Waste Management Digging Deeper. I'm Michelle Veazey, the Executive Director of NHBSR. It's so nice to have so many of you joining us today to learn more about how you can move your efforts to reduce waste forward. As most of you know, NHBSR is a statewide nonprofit with just under 200 members focusing on advancing sustainable business. Our programming strives to convene, inspire, and support businesses and their community stakeholders to make New Hampshire a more sustainable and prosperous state for all. Measure What Matters is our newest addition to NHBSR programming, and we're enjoying the opportunity to engage more deeply with members to learn where we can add value to our members' sustainability efforts. Measure What Matters is a multifaceted program designed to not only help you measure your sustainability progress through B-Lab's Quick Impact and Business Impact Assessment tools, but also to provide insights, expertise, and the tools that you need with programming right here in New Hampshire. We're excited to have just launched a succinct version of the assessment, the Measure What Matters 101 survey, which allows you to focus on the most important aspects of your sustainability efforts. So we encourage you, if you haven't already received a reminder from me, to go to our webpage, our Measure What Matters webpage at nhbsr.org/MWM to take that survey. I also wanted to give you a couple of quick logistics before I launch into the introduction of our webinar speaker today. So our webinar is going to be around 30 minutes long in terms of just the presentation itself. And so all of the attendee audio will be muted during that time so that we don't broadcast background noise to one another. But I'll let you know, but I will, towards the end of the webinar, unmute everyone so that you can ask your questions in person, but also know that you can be submitting your questions through the tool on the side of your, on your web page or your your webinar screen, so that you can submit your questions via text as well, and we'll ask them if you prefer not to do it in person. You can also, when I open up the mics, mute yourself if you choose to. The webinar is being recorded, and a link will be provided to you in the follow-up email tomorrow. So if you'd like to share it with others on your team, that's a great way to do it. Today, we're happy to dive into one of the areas that challenge all of us in our businesses and our personal life, reducing our waste. Jess Baum is going to be sharing her insights with us today. Jess is the Sustainability Manager for W.S. Badger in Gilsum, New Hampshire. She's passionate about finding hopeful, healing, and engaging solutions to climate change and the paradox of living as a caring being in a complex post-industrial world. She brings 10+ years of experience in environmental and sustainability work and has a professional science master's in environmental studies. In her spare time, Jess enjoys gardening, herbalism, and walking in the woods. Jess will also be co-presenting with Lisa Drake, the Director of Sustainability Innovation at Stonyfield, at our spring conference on May 1st, which I'll give you more information on later. Their session, Generating Goodness, Innovative Climate Action Approaches, is one of 12 different sessions you can attend at the conference. So now I am going to hand control over to Jess and let her take the presentation from here. So, thanks so much, Jess, for joining us.
Thank you so much, Michelle, for this opportunity to share a really important and awesome thing that I'm really excited to talk about. So with that, I'm going to launch right into what we're doing today. So the name of today's presentation is Measure What Matters, Waste Management Digging Deeper, and it's adapted from something I put together for a Towards Zero Waste, a how-to for business. And really, it is going to hopefully give you some some actionable items that you can engage in at your home or business to start taking more responsibility for your waste and minimizing it. So our agenda, there we go. Our agenda for these next 30 minutes is we are going to go over what the problem is, and we're not going to really focus on that very much because we're all aware, which is why we're here today. And we're going to talk about the pathway to waste reduction using Badger's process and story as an example. Then we're going to launch into the how-to part, and I've got some tools that I'm going to be sharing with all of you, and I'm going to go over them briefly as long as there's time at the end so that you know how to use them. And then we will have some questions and discussion. So as we all know, the problem is that we live in a finite world, and a lot of us live in a linear way within a circular system. And what I mean by that is that there is no waste in nature. In nature, everything is circular. Waste is a completely human construct. In the forest, when leaves fall, they are broken down by fungus and they become part of the soil again. And that circular process means that there is no waste. But the way that humans have been living in recent history has been in a more linear way, where at the end of there's an end of life of products where we send things away, and we're realizing that there is no more away. And I love this photo because it's one example of that, that there is no away, that things don't just stop existing the minute they leave wherever they began. So at Badger, we really like this idea of circularity and mimicking nature's processes. So this right here is a stamp, actually, as you probably guessed, and it is a northeast deciduous forest. And in this forest, you can see that there's trees growing from the soil, and they drop their leaves and create more soil. And there's birds that eat the insects that are in that soil. There are weasels that eat the birds. There is a bear that eats what grows on the trees, and there's fungus that breaks it all down. So this is one example of a circular system that we try to mimic in our waste reduction strategy here at Badger, and that indeed many places throughout the world are trying to mimic. So,
Jess, can I interrupt really briefly? The audio apparently is a little low, so is there any way you could increase your sound or speak louder?
yes. Is this helpful?
That is. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm kind of new to this, so I appreciate any technological help. I've moved my mic. Okay, so we're going to talk about closing the loop and about these human versus natural systems. So this is from the story of Stuff, which many of you may be familiar with, and it's this example of a linear system where we are extracting resources from the natural world, producing them into products that we then distribute and consume and then dispose of. We don't really think of where things come from before and after that, whereas in the natural world, we are flowing through this biological nutrient cycle where there is no beginning and end because energy cannot be created or destroyed. And so there's this idea in manufacturing that we can move to a similar cycle where the end of life is the beginning of new life, and you might have heard it referred to as cradle to cradle. So we're going to launch into what we've done here at Badger and how we've applied this. So here at Badger, we are a community of about 100 people from all different backgrounds and walks of life. Some of us are on board with sustainability and moving towards zero waste. Some of us know less about it, but are committed to the mission that we have here, which boils down to healing products, healthy business, make a difference. And we really put a lot of energy into building a culture of kindness. And as a business, we want to be the change we wish to see in the world. We're also a certified B Corp, which Michelle talked a bit about at the beginning. And that means that we are really big on measuring what our impact is and assessing it over time. You can't manage what you don't measure. So if you're driving down the road and you get pulled over and a police officer asks you how fast you're going. If you have a broken speedometer, you have no idea. So here at Badger, we do a lot of work to measure what we do so that we can manage it. And one way that we've done this is in our effort to reduce our waste and to work on our environmental impact, we started measuring our waste in 2015. And guess what happened? We engaged our employees in this process through various things like waste assessments, which you see here on the left with some of our employees, and some various plastic-free challenges that we've engaged in to challenge by choice employees who would like to engage in this work in their own homes. And click, no, there we go. And we saw real results. So since we began measuring in 2015, we've diverted over 258,000 pounds of waste from landfills. We began with sending about 29% of our waste to the landfill and only composting about 10%. And as of winter 2019, last February in our last assessment, we are only sending 3% of our waste to the landfill, and 66% of it is being composted or reused in that circular process that we talked about that mimics nature. And you can see here our progress over time, and you'll note right here that we had a spike in 2018. What happened here is that in 2017, we brought our sunscreen manufacturing in-house. It had been previously created, our sunscreen, by a sub-manufacturer. And when we brought it in-house, we realized that we had this entirely new system or this new material of sunscreen byproduct, what we we kindly call it sludge. It's basically just a bunch of sunscreen that's stuck in the tubes that can't be moved through to put into a package to be sold, and that needs to be cleaned out so it gets all watery. And so that's what that spike was here. And we weren't prepared for it. So the first year we sent it to the landfill, and since we have found a solution to compost it, and we've also found a solution to transform another waste stream from our product that I'll talk more about later. So I really love how this shows that we were doing really good work, and then suddenly we had a new problem, and we needed to find a solution, and then we did. In the context of other companies, just to give you an idea of what this means, that we had a 97% waste diversion rate, which again means that we diverted 97% of our waste from landfill and only sent 3% of it to landfill or incineration. You can see these other really great companies doing great work and where they're at. And New Belgium Brewery was at 99.9%. I noticed that a lot of breweries often are at the top, and I think that's because their largest waste stream is spent grain and other things that they use to make their beer, which are easily compostable. So how did we achieve 97% waste diversion, and how are these other companies doing similar things? Well, having heightened awareness and accountability just through having a waste assessment program and talking about this with our employees has led to shifting behavior. Engaging our community in the problem of reducing our waste, and really in the solution, it should say engaging our community in the solution, changes the community culture. So it was interesting to see people that at the beginning of this process really knew nothing about zero waste or waste reduction, just took this on fully. And for a while, our waste assessments were led by different subsets of our company, and it became a really interesting part of culture and sparked some interesting conversations. Also, education, communication, and signage led to less missorted waste. So digging into why things were put in the wrong place and realizing that our signs were not accurately describing where people should put what was compostable, what was recyclable, and what wasn't. And so doing some education around that, which can be very confusing when you have so many different streams of waste, has led to improvement. Additionally, tying small changes to a big picture impact has led to motivation and connection. So at Badger, we are a mission-driven company, as I mentioned before, and each job description starts with this role supports the Badger mission and principles through, and then goes into the job description. So we have a group of people here that really want to be connected to this big picture change and to the B Corp movement as a whole. And so when we're able to say that we're moving towards zero waste together rather than, hey, shame on you for putting that banana peel in the trash can instead of the compost, it makes a big difference. So when we tie those tiny changes to big picture impact, we are empowering individuals to feel like what they do matters and like they can make a difference in the world through the small changes that they make in the way that they live their lives here at Badger, just within the four walls of work. And we see ripples that connects to many people in their lives outside of work and their dinner table conversation and the choices that they're making. Creating communication channels leads to asking and answering questions. So if you don't have that, a lot of people will all have the same question and they all feel like they need to know the answer. And if you don't create communication channels that are comfortable for everybody, those questions and answers can't really be journeyed into. And so for us, that looks like having different options for people with different languages of engagement. So not everybody is going to feel comfortable at a company meeting raising their hand and asking a question in front of 100 people. So having opportunities like small group discussions, like anonymous questions, a box where people can put anonymous questions and they can be answered in public ways that everybody can see the answer to is really helpful. Most importantly, problem solving in community leads to engagement, results, and excitement. So we're going to look at some of what that, actually, never mind, that's not the next slide. So the simple pathway to doing this, to reducing. And this is where I'm going to pull up some other things. Hang on just one moment. Technology snafu with two screens. Okay, so step one is assess the quantity and the content of your waste. And I have some tools that I'm going to be sending to you, including this right here, which is a waste assessment how-to, and it's really just a guide. You can use this to figure out what would work well for your organization, whether you have just a small team of people like if you have a sustainability department. Currently, we just do our sustainability and facilities departments work together on this. At one point, we had signups from across the organization. To date, we've had at least a third of our employees participate in waste assessments. But this can kind of help you figure out what you need to do for a waste assessment. And while we're on that, I'll share a quick story about our waste assessment process at Badger. In the early days, we would put all of our trash into the dumpster, and then we would get a ladder and we would climb into the dumpster and pull all of the waste out of it, and it was disgusting. And people would make fun of us a little bit. It was this kind of, not make fun of us, but it was this sweet joke about dumpster diving. And one day, one of us had this revelation that we could work with our facilities department to not put the trash in the dumpster in the first place. And so instead of dumpster diving, we just pulled all of the bags of trash for a week. Additionally, originally, we went through 2 weeks of waste at a time because our dumpster was picked up every 2 weeks. So we just went through everything in the dumpster a couple times a year. And we realized that we really didn't have to be doing 2 weeks, that we could just do 1 week. Other examples of the questions you might ask yourself is, do you want to be assessing all of the individual streams of waste? For example, do you want a team of people that are opening all of the bags and looking for different things and sorting and weighing them individually, or do you just want to weigh all your trash and all your recycling and all of your compost? So there's different ways to do it. And at Badger in the early days, we would sort through every bag and pull everything apart, and we would have different streams that we weighed individually so that we were able to look at what we should go after first. And now we have a different way of doing it where we do that with our recycling. We sort everything individually, but with our trash, we're just weighing the whole bag. And we are connecting with individuals around what streams of waste they see going into the trash that they feel we can do better with. So there's just different ways. But to bring it all back, the simple thing that you want to do to start with is just assess the quantity and the content of your waste. And it can be through any level of granularity that I just mentioned. 2, identify areas for improvement and pick a few to focus on. And also I have for you, with this moving back to assess first, I have examples of Badger's tracking sheets that we use in our actual assessments that you are welcome to take and make your own. So 2, identify, and I have one for recycling assessment too. Sorry, keep going back and forth. So identify. Here are examples of some of the questions that you might ask yourself. What did you find most surprising about the waste composition? What % of your trash by weight and or by volume was missorted and should have been recycled, reused, composted, etc.? If you're finding when you look in your trash that you have a lot of recyclables in there or a lot of compost, that's a really good opportunity to educate people in your company to change behavior and shift the culture to properly dispose of items. And it could be something as simple as better signage or connecting these small actions to a bigger picture. In any culture, it's going to be different. What did you find the most of by weight and by volume? And I included both of these because depending on what you're looking at, those things one might be more important than the other. We used to do both. We would measure weight and we would estimate volume, but that's a lot to do. So now we really just do weight. But for example, in our first assessment, we found that 11% by volume of our trash was brown paper. By weight, it was only like 1%, but by volume, we realized it was a lot. And so we made some changes to eliminate that from trash. But if you don't want to measure both waste and volume, or weight and volume, you can just make some qualitative observations. So what process shifts could help to remove some of the trash found? And how could you shift your purchasing decisions to result in less waste? These are examples of some of the questions that we've asked ourselves. And so I'm sharing this with you, but for your organization, there could be a whole bunch of other ones too. So after that, after you've identified areas for improvement and picked a few to focus on, the next step is to progress in setting goals, assigning action items, and measuring improvement. So doing periodic follow-up assessments to see how you're doing and making sure that every individual knows whose responsibility it is to measure and manage the goals that you've set. And I have this right here because growing up, I learned about the 3 R's, reduce, reuse, recycle. And today there's a lot more variation on those 3 R's. Here I have 5, but there's as much as 7 now. And they're in order of importance. So the most important thing you can do is refuse what you don't need, then reduce what you're using, then reuse what you do use, and then recycle, and then compost. And depending on what happens with our recycling system, with the changes that have happened recently with China refusing much of the recycling that we've traditionally sent there, I could see this order changing. So step 1, assess, be safe and know what you're getting into, set the space and suit up. Sort by, oops, I made a mistake. I went into this earlier. Sort by category, measure each category by weight and volume, and document and record your observations. And then in that identify, make sense of your findings in Excel. And I also have an Excel spreadsheet that I am sending to all of you based on our waste assessment process here, where you would just put in your raw data. You only enter information in the green cells. So here you would put your number of employees so that you could get pounds of trash per employee if you wanted it. And here you can change these items to match what you would find for your organization. But if you put these numbers in, then raw data reuse, we measure our reuse as well. You'll end up with statistics, measured waste composition by percentage, you compared to other companies and an overview. So that's available to you. So in that spreadsheet, you can look for patterns and numbers and ask questions. Identify potential improvement areas and gather stakeholders and prioritize set goals for improvement with accountability. So one example is you might find that you have a lot of junk mail. And if that's something that employees are passionate about, that can be a first step. Another thing, maybe you find that there's a lot of compost in your trash, and that's something that is important to people, so you work on that first. Or maybe you find that you have a lot of paper in your recycling, and there are ways that you can engage in paper-free processes. So I'm going to share some examples of this process and how it's worked at Badger. So I mentioned this before. In our first assessment, 11% of our trash by volume was paper towels and napkins. So we purchased energy-efficient hand dryers and began composting our napkins. A large percent of our recycling was cardboard. So we created a program for box reuse, including these really cute stickers that go on our consumer-facing boxes that say something about this isn't our first time around. And I know of a lot of companies that have closed-loop programs where they are hauling their cardboard directly back to the supplier of the cardboard, and it goes right to pulp. So that's another interesting way to do that. We had all this waste protective gear that was in our trash, and so we found a company to recycle these in a special box. The company is called TerraCycle. We had a lot of hangers from shirts in our production department that get cleaned every week. And so we found these little boxes at a local dry cleaner, and we collect the hangers and we return them to the dry cleaner and they reuse them. In 2018, we had 7,000 pounds of what we call BALM gleanings, which is basically a byproduct from our BALM, B-A-L-M, making process. So we make sleep balm and foot balm and lip balms and all sorts of Badger balm for hardworking hands. And in the machines at the end of a run, there's some material that can't be used because it has to be flushed out with olive oil, and it makes a really great organic material that we had been trying to send to use as biofuel for a while, but there was so much beeswax that it wasn't ideal for that. And so this year we've partnered with a company called Way Out Wax to transform these gleanings into anti-bug candles, the Trinella candles that will be launched next month. We also had, I mentioned this already, our 32,000 pounds of sunscreen sludge that we found a compost solution for. So in making progress, a best practice is to hold a waste assessment 2 to 4 times a year or whatever is appropriate for you. At the beginning, we didn't share with employees when this was going to happen because we didn't want people to alter their behavior. We realized ultimately that being transparent is really important, and even if people were altering their behavior for the assessment, then there was a good chance they'd continue to alter it. So we stopped keeping this secret, and we didn't really see a shift, and so that worked for us. But I know for other companies, keeping them secret is what's best. We report on improvements and challenges transparently. So we have quarterly company meetings where we talk about different things, and I'll give an update about how we're doing through different communication methods to the company so that when we make improvements, we celebrate them together because it's the work of everybody and not just myself and those who actually work on the assessment. Really everybody's responsibility. Be agile in priorities and goal settings if need be. Sometimes things shift and change, and the thing that you really wanted to go after first is a much more complicated thing than something else, and so shifting priorities in order to make improvement can be important. Most importantly, it's not about being perfect, it's about making progress, and so I try really hard to make sure that we don't think about our diversion rate as like a score or a game. This is about doing good for the world. It's not about just having a really high number that feels good. It's about continuing to rigorously inventory what we're doing, and then over time shifting and changing to be better. And I did not think I was going to get through all of that so fast, so I apologize if I rushed. But that is what I wanted to share with you, and I would love to hear any questions or if there's anything you'd like me to revisit to give some clarity on.
So just one question did come in via the chat window, and I'm wondering whether you could share how you've been so effective in communicating with employees about what goes where. Like, I imagine they're thinking signs.
Yes, we have signs everywhere in all of the places that things might go, and trying to have like not just I can't think of the word right now, but having areas where there's bins for many different things, like stations, hubs, waste hubs, where there's signs for each thing is really helpful. And you can find some really great examples online. I also like to take pictures whenever I'm just out and about and I see a really good system, but Pinterest or the internet in general has some really good examples of that. And then if there's something that we see as being like a consistent problem, then we'll talk about it and bring it to something, to a company meeting, or we have a company newsletter that goes out and we'll include it in that.
Okay. Unmuted everyone, which was probably a mistake.
If you can mute yourself,
I'm sorry?
the mic at the top, you can click it and that will mute to reduce feedback.
So anybody who has a lot of background noise, if you could just click the mic yourself, that would be great. But I wanted to open it up to people to ask questions, so please feel free.
Hey Jess, this is Brett.
Hi, Brett.
Hey, this is really awesome. Really impressive what you guys have done in the company. I'm just kind of curious. I know a big part of this is probably empowering employees like you and others to really own this, but at the same time, there has to be, I think, to some degree that push from senior leadership. Can you talk a little bit about, where are you on that spectrum of top down sort of pushing that message versus, empowering employees? Where does Badger fit in that spectrum?
That's a really great question. And I think that we're unique in that for us, it's top down, it's middle out, it's bottom up, it's everything. But I think that we've seen a lot of success with senior leadership, which in our case is a family leadership team and a few other directors, saying that we think this is really important and setting goals in a strategic plan that support this, and then empowering employees through, we've had various iterations of a green team. And it used to be that the green team, which was called the Sustainability Committee, would run the trash assessment, and it was a cross-departmental group of employees that had been empowered by their direct managers that worked with myself and our COO and co-owner. And so there was that direct connection from the subject matter to a leader in the company. And we also report on our progress in our annual report every year, which we're a New Hampshire benefit corporation. That's our legal standing. And so part of that is that we need to have a transparent consumer-facing report on our impact published every year. And this is something that we report on. So it's very easy for employees to see that it's an important thing that we're prioritizing and reporting out. And so I think that kind of leadership through departments it comes from the top, from the management of the company saying this is important, but then also from like the grassroots of empowering individuals in each department to be a champion for this work through our green team structure. We found that to be really effective.
Great, thank you. Yeah, everyone loves to talk about it, but when the rubber hits the road, that's when it really matters, right?
Yeah.
So we have a question coming in from Shabazz Sufi from the questions panel. So you briefly mentioned it, but what does WS Badger include landfill and incineration in their goals towards zero waste? So do you include landfill and incineration in your goals towards zero waste?
We do not consider things being incinerated or going to landfill as being zero waste. So for us, moving towards zero waste, and we're really careful not to say zero waste because we don't think that we'll ever have absolutely zero waste. Depending on who you ask, some people and certifications say that 95% and up or 90% and up technically means that you're zero waste. But for us, what zero waste means ideally would mean that 100% of the materials coming out of our building and our processes here would find use actively into something else. So either they would be transformed in compost or recycling or reused.
That's great. How often do you actually share with employees your results of your basically the output of all of these great tools? Is that something you share in detail, or you try to provide just a high-level report?
I try to provide a high-level report, and then I ask for questions, and if there's things that I hear a lot of people bringing up, then I'll address them regularly. But usually that number for us is either the diversion rate or the percent sent to landfill, which in our case is currently 3%. And then we'll talk about like big picture things like the sunscreen and the BOM gleanings and that circularity system where we're finding reuse for manufacturing byproducts. So if there's like a large stream, we'll talk about that. And really regularly, I put updates in our company newsletter about what's happening around this.
Michelle, do you mind if I follow up on my question?
Please do.
Yeah, Jess, I asked the question only because we've seen that, in some cases there are, it sounds like you all are using, you guys are choosing your goals very holistically and wisely, but we've seen that sometimes there are maybe manufacturers, but particularly sometimes institutions that are going towards like no landfill goals, but then they're sending a bunch of stuff to incineration, which isn't helping the it's not helping the challenges, right?
Yeah.
So it's a bit of a, some organizations don't go about it so transparently because I think everybody assumes if it's not going to landfill, then it's not going anywhere that would be worse or just as bad. But obviously that's not always the case for some organizations. So it's really cool to see that Badger has been able to get down to 3%, in that goal.
Yeah, thank you for that, and thank you for pointing that out. And that actually reminds me that I have another tool going out to you that I actually don't have access to on this computer, but it's a greenhouse gas inventory of your waste. And so you can use that to establish what the emissions, what the carbon footprint is of your waste, whether your trash is going to landfill or to incineration or being recycled. And that's something that we are going to be using more and more of as we start to address our Scope 3 carbon footprint and move towards being a climate neutral or climate positive company, which is ultimately our goal. And then on that note too, I'd also like to share that for us, recycling also isn't an ideal solution and not something that we want to rely too heavily on. Oh, thank you so much, Michelle. Michelle has put up the the
Yeah.
greenhouse gas inventory, waste inventory, which is from the EPA. I did
Yeah,
not
it's a great
create
tool.
you've worked with it before, Shabazz?
Yeah, we've at Casella we've used this with our customers before. The customers that are, you know, they're thinking about these questions. We use this to help us be able to determine some of our customers, um, uh, you know, waste, the base, you know, the GHG from their waste.
Wonderful. I'm glad that I just discovered it recently, and I'm glad to hear that other people have found it useful
Yeah.
as I
Yeah,
begin to using it more.
Casella, I think, does a great job working with their customers to really, you know, help them advance their waste reduction efforts. So, just
That's
an
really
example of one of the
wonderful.
tools. Yeah.
And within this, I'll point out that I think it's under the user guide.
I'll switch.
There's instructions, and there's also instructions for specifying how far away your trash is traveling. So, for example, Badger is in Gilsum, New Hampshire, and our trash goes to a place in Keene, and then it goes somewhere else. So it's traveling quite a distance, and so in order to have an accurate greenhouse gas assessment of that, we need to change some of those numbers, which there's a place to do that. And it might be in analysis inputs actually, or somewhere else, but it's easy enough to find just by clicking on tabs. But I did want to go back to the recycling issue that I had raised, which is just that I think a lot of us here, I know, so I'm 35, so I came of age in the 90s and early 2000s, and the environmental movement at the time talked a lot about the ozone layer, and we talked a lot about recycling. And that was the push. It was like, as long as you are putting all of your containers that you're using into the proper bin and recycling them instead of throwing them in the trash, then you're doing good work. And today we realize that that's just not enough. Recycling is an industry. It's a money-making venture. And when it no longer is financially feasible to buy up those recyclable materials, there's no longer a home for them. And in 2018, China made the decision to stop accepting a lot of the recycling that they were from around the world out of concern for the human and environmental health impacts for the people of their country. And since then, there's been a huge flow, and I'm sure that Shabazz can tell us more about this working for Casella if he wants to. But I've heard stories of people throwing all of their recycling into bins, that getting picked up at the curbside, going to a municipal facility where it ends up being incinerated because there's nowhere for it to go. So as a company at Badger, we are doing as much work as we can to dig into where our recycling is going and what's happening to it, and also ultimately to reducing our recycling. That is not something that we want to depend upon to get to zero waste or towards zero waste. Reuse or compost, or just refusing packaging and having less of it, which we were able to do with our bug spray bottles. We have these aluminum bottles for our bug spray that used to come wrapped in package, and we were able to start getting them banded together just with one band in these like hexagons that look like beehive little compartments. So that helped us reduce our waste. So we're looking at the life cycle of everything we bring into the building, and not just what's in the trash and where we can move it or where it can go. We're also looking back at the beginning of those materials and thinking, how can we reduce that amount of material? How can we work with the manufacturer who's sending us this? Because we don't really want to have to rely on recycling. Shabazz, do you have anything to add about that from the waste management side?
Yeah, so I mean, I think definitely from our perspective, Casella divested from incineration. I think it was 5 or 6 years ago, before I was at the company. And I think we do look at incineration as it is a disincentive to recycle. I think, going even, to your point, yeah, the only reason the recycling industry exists is because of the way in which sort of mass production came about, right? And so the need for recycling as it exists today wasn't there, if you go back 50 years ago, because just there just wasn't the same level of sort of like, I guess, mass production and mass consumerism, right? So the way to have made it to sort of monetize on that is, well, you set up recycling industries where at least you can recapture the value of some of this material. And unfortunately, there are some parts of the country, not really in the Northeast, but I know there have been some parts of the country where they've been actually reducing recycling programs because with the national sword policy in China, they don't have very many other options. I know that in the Northeast, we have still been able to find outlets for our recycling, and so we've not had to send our recycling to landfill or incineration, at least not us personally as a company. And I think that may also just speak to, because of our particular size of company, we're just big enough that we have the markets. We have the capacity to reach different markets, and we're not so large that we're like, I think, as overwhelmed as maybe some other really large companies that maybe process way more than we do.
Yeah, that's a great perspective. Thanks, Shabazz. Jess, we have another question. The person is asking whether Badger has applied EPA's food recovery hierarchy to the food scraps heading to the compost.
No, I'm actually not familiar with that. Because our food scrap compost is mostly just from our lunch program, and the majority of it is not even like plate scraps. It's like, like the ends of carrots and like household, what you would see in your house. And so it actually currently, we had stopped our on-site composting operation a little while ago because of a rodent problem, and we'd switched to sending it to pigs. And then we have a commercial compost that takes our brown paper and also that is now taking our sunscreen sludge. But I would love to learn more about that, and I'm going to write it down.
Well, Sam actually shared the URL, so I'll send that out to everyone along with your worksheets.
Wonderful.
Yeah. So any other questions people might have for Jess? Well, Jess, I really want to thank you for sharing your insights and experience. You've really provided us with a lot of great information, but also great tools. So as Jess mentioned, we'll be sending out an email with all the tools that she's referenced today. And I think maybe one or two more that you might not have directly referenced, right? So I really thank you for that. And also just wanted to mention, in addition, you'll get an email with these attachments, but they will also be available on, we're going to create a tools page under Measure What Matters with a number, the webinars as we're going along, the recordings, but then also the tools that are provided. And so it will be available there as well if you lose track of your email in the future. I did want to mention that the webinar has been recorded and it'll be sent to you tomorrow. But I'd also like to invite all of you to attend our spring conference on May 1st. We have a great lineup of speakers focusing on the latest in sustainable business opportunities and, of course, networking with great people and great businesses. So it'll be a wonderful opportunity for you all. So if you haven't registered, go to nhbsr.org/conference and make sure you get signed up. And I also wanted to mention, if you have any questions about today's presentation or have ideas for future topics, please make sure to let us know. Our Measure What Matters committee is working on a monthly lineup of webinars. Our next one in May is going to be on creating healthy workplaces, so watch for that as well. And then also the email tomorrow will also have my contact information. So if you want to, I haven't asked Jess's permission yet, so I'll just say if you want to connect with her, if you can just email me, and I'll connect you to her if you have any further questions. But I truly do thank you, Jess, for sharing your expertise with us today, and look forward to seeing everyone on May 1st. So thank you all.
Thank you.